of color to intentionally under-resourced neighborhoods, and it prevented homeownership. And so I think the biggest example of this that pops out to me is when we talk about the New Deal. And I don't know if you studied this in high school, but I remember studying it. There's like a little blurb about Levittown, which is the very first suburb that really benefited from these policies. And so after World War II, veterans were able to take advantage of these government loans that were able to make housing affordable for them. And so that was really the birth of what we know of as the middle class, or, the increase of what we know of as the middle class. And something that kind of astounded me was that it's estimated that 98% of these loans went to white veterans, even though you had veterans of every race, different nationalities, all kinds of people fighting in World War II. And so this story, it's funny, Austin, where you talk about Ohio, and that's where I have family from. My dad grew up there. And part of the reason we're in Ohio, like part of the reason that I'm not from Georgia, is because I had a great uncle who fought in World War II. And when he came back to the United States, he couldn't buy a house. So not just like, gee, I'm not sure why no one's selling me a house, as in it was illegal for a lot of these places he wanted to buy a house. It was not legal for him to buy one. And even if he could get a loan, he couldn't move there. And so eventually he had an army buddy who was an architect who built houses. And so he was able to buy a house from his army buddy because he had a say in who could buy it. And so he actually ended up selling a few of his homes to Black veterans because that was the only way they could buy homes. And that made such a difference in my family, the opportunities that we had, that someone in the family owned a home. And it really opened up so much potential for the rest of my family. And so some of the ways that this happens is like, how can you legally mandate who lives where, right? Like, how do you enforce that? And one of the ways, which is probably the most straightforward, it's something called a restrictive covenant. And it's language in the deed of the house that says, if you sell this house, you can only sell it to another white person. It's in the deed. And there's actually, it's not enforceable anymore. It was eventually ruled illegal by the Supreme Court, but there's people today who still have that language in the deed of their house. Like, they buy houses. Yeah, I see some people nodding. It's literally in there, and people look at it and they're like, what is that? Is that even legal? Like, why is this here? Another way was zoning. And so actually, what I learned from this book is that we actually got zoning as a workaround to make laws that prevented people of color from moving into certain neighborhoods without using racial language. So you would say, okay, we're going to make this neighborhood industrial, and we're going to make this neighborhood multifamily, but we're going to zone this neighborhood single family residential. And so you have a bunch of people who can't buy homes because it's not legal for them to get a loan, or they don't qualify. So they can only live in these multifamily homes. So that was another way. So that was how we got zoning, which I just kind of take for granted. Is like, this is just how you plan a city. But this was a workaround so that we didn't have racialized language, keeping people from living in certain places. One of the other myths that he dispelled in this book that I was also surprised by was that some of the rationale for all of this segregation was, well, we have this neighborhood, but if we have people of color who move into the neighborhood, it's going to make the housing price go down. So all of these recommendations are actually to keep the housing market up. And what research found was that actually African Americans moving into a neighborhood would increase property values, because there were so few places that people could live that landowners and sellers and renters knew that they could overcharge, because supply and demand. So when African Americans would start moving into a neighborhood, the housing prices would go up until all the houses were sold to African Americans, and then the government would typically divest resources from these neighborhoods, and that's when the prices would start to go down. Subprime loans were another one of these kind of tactics that were very disparate in the way they impacted different types of people. So for folks who remember 2008 housing crash. I graduated from college in 2009. So the first class after the housing crash to graduate from college, that was a doozy. It was not the most fun thing in the world. But government investigations showed that banks actually specifically targeted Black buyers for subprime loans. And these were one of the biggest causes of that collapse of the housing market. And then another thing that the way that this was enforced is actually state sanctioned violence that prevented integration. So you would have mobs camped out on the lawns of people of color who moved into previously segregated neighborhoods. There were burnings, there were bombings. Like if you talk to people from Alabama, the city of Birmingham in the 60s and 50s had been nicknamed Bombingham because so many people had their houses bombed when they tried to desegregate neighborhoods. They actually had the most unsolved bombings in the country of houses. It was a really high number. And so oftentimes law enforcement would support these mobs, or they would ignore the victims. And sometimes Black homeowners themselves or the people who sold to them would be arrested for inciting a riot. So imagine somebody buying a home in this segregated neighborhood. They finally bought it. Somebody took a risk, sold it to them. A mob shows up, lights their house on fire, and they get arrested for inciting a mob, right? Crazy. So they would move out and they would never move back, and the neighborhood would remain segregated. And another example that I have of this is actually a friend of mine who grew up in LA. And when his parents were buying a home, they had two homes that they had narrowed it down to, the two neighborhoods that they really wanted to buy in. And one was Inglewood, which if you're familiar with Inglewood, it's like predominantly Black neighborhood. And the other one was Westwood, which is where UCLA is. And so they actually weren't able to buy a home in Westwood. Nobody would sell to them. And so they bought a home in Inglewood. And so interestingly enough, the average home price in LA was about $100,000. So in today's dollars, that would be $300,000, a little over 300,000. Who would like to buy a house in LA for $300,000? That would be great. But that was how much they probably bought that house for. But now in Inglewood, the average home price is $670,000. And in Westwood, it's $1.5 million. So almost $1 million of wealth that they missed out on because they weren't able to buy homes in those neighborhoods in Westwood, which is pretty wild. And so I'm going to actually show you a visual. Some of you, I'm a visual learner, so I like to see pictures of things and it helps me piece it together. But some of you are more verbal, but for my visual people, I'm going to show you what we mean when we say redlining. And so redlining is the practice of taking a neighborhood and assessing how, quote unquote, risky is it to put out mortgages in these neighborhoods. And so the government, actually in most cases, the government was the one who developed these maps. And they would send surveyors out to the neighborhoods. And if a neighborhood was white or mostly white, they would give it a green rating. And if the neighborhood was Black, they would give it red. And then you'd have blue and yellow in between. So here's a visual of Pittsburgh, where they went through the whole city of Pittsburgh and they marked different neighborhoods in red, blue, green, or yellow. And so that's why we call it redlining, is because there were entire sections of the city that they would say, okay, these are red, these are risky home loans, we're not going to give anybody a mortgage here. And the catch from that
Hey
was
Lou,
yeah?
because your computer is sharing with mine, the map is actually on my screen.
Oh,
And your audio is coming from your screen.
oh gosh. Is that confusing for people?
I think it's confusing to me.
Okay, let us try something
so
else.
so let's do this. I'll mute your, or can you do it? You're on your phone, right?
I'm on my laptop.
Oh, okay. Let me just move this over. I can mute you there and then bring you onto my screen.
Perfect.
So we should be able to hear you now, Lou, if you
All
talk.
right. You can hear me?
Yep, so your audio is good. And then there. And yep, so we should be able to see your screen. Are you guys able to see her screen well? Yep, so you're good.
All right. So this is Pittsburgh. And there's actually maps available like this for most cities. So you could look this up and see this in your own city. But the red are Black neighborhoods, often Latino neighborhoods, and the green are white neighborhoods. And so people who live in these red neighborhoods, we talk through all the ways that segregation would happen. And so these red neighborhoods were the only places a lot of people could live. Like if they had $1 million, they could still only live in this red neighborhood and they couldn't get a home loan. Another piece of trivia for those of you who follow sports and care about the San Francisco Giants baseball team, Willie Mays actually couldn't buy a house when he first started playing for the Giants. The coach of the Giants, or may have been the owner, had to contact the mayor of San Francisco and have the mayor put in a good word for him with people selling homes.
Wow.
Which is pretty wild. But this is what redlining looks like, so you can get a visual of these maps and how the government used to prevent people from getting loans. Here's another visual. This is in Richmond, Virginia. And so on the left side, you see the housing grade that we talked about in that last slide. And on the right side, there's something called the Social Vulnerability Index. So it's a lot of different factors, but they take like the poverty rate, life expectancy, some things like that. And you can see a pretty direct correlation between the areas that were redlined and the people who are most socially vulnerable. It's almost a 1-for-1. But these neighborhoods that were historically redlined still are dealing with a lot of disparities even today because of that. Here's another visual. This is the Bay Area, which is where I'm from. And so on the right, again, you see the redlining map. Or sorry, on the left is the redlining map. And then on the right, this is the number of ER visits in this area for asthma. So like asthma-related emergency visits per 10,000 residents. And so you can see that the areas that are red have higher rates of asthma and higher rates of ER visits for asthma. All right, so I will stop screen sharing. But those are just some overviews of how the redlining has really affected the people who still live in these areas today. And it's not just theoretical. Like there's, when we talk about zoning, a lot of these redline neighborhoods were zoned hazardous. And these were neighborhoods that were acceptable to build chemical factories and industrial firms that had all kinds of pollution into the air. People weren't allowed to put those in the single family resident zoned areas, but they could put them in the multifamily areas. So higher pollution, higher water pollution, a lot of these things would lead to these health disparities, like fewer hospitals, poor transportation, all kinds of issues with these neighborhoods that were really the responsibility of the government to build that infrastructure and protect people. So on a more positive note, we talked through all of this, like, okay, this is kind of heavy, but what do we do? And so one recommendation I have for you is learning your local history when it comes to housing. So you could probably go into Google and type redlining map and the name of your city and see what that looks like. You can learn about some of the disparities that happened in your community from this redlining. You can learn about lending disparities in your region. It's another interesting thing that you can go look at, where you'll see people in historically redlined neighborhoods having lower rates of acceptance for loans than people who are not in redlined areas. So just learn about what's happening in your region, what's happening in your city. And once you know that, maybe something will pique your interest. Maybe you'll feel passionate about a particular area. And then I'd encourage you to partner with local organizations or government programs that are working on reversing some of these effects. And some of the work here will be pretty involved. Some of it's pretty easy. There's actually this nonprofit that has this program where they encourage other nonprofits to put their money into Black-owned banks. And a lot of these banks, they're FDIC insured. So up to a certain amount, even if the bank goes out of business, you'll get your money. And what we find is that Black-owned businesses have much higher rates of approving loans for Black-owned businesses and for potential Black owners. And so when this money is in their bank, you start to see some of these disparities shift a little bit simply because they give out more loans to these communities. Versus like a traditional Fortune 500 bank, they'll have a lot more disparities. So there are nonprofits and different organizations that have just put millions of dollars into these banks simply just by saving their money there. And that frees up capital for these banks then to go invest into some of these historically redlined communities. So that's one really simple way, but you might find that there are a lot of other things that you can do as you're building these homes. Austin talked about it. Like when you're renovating these homes, what city are you picking? What neighborhood? What are some of the criteria that you have for potential clients? There's really a lot of ways to start to offset some of these disparities, and some of them actually are pretty simple and can be pretty easy.
Awesome. Thank you, Lou, for all of that. My mind is blown. like like zoning. So because of what I do for work, I deal with the city and a lot of zoning issues. I would have never attributed or even connected the two. Like in my mind, like you said, oh, it's just city planning. Like this is just what happens. You can only have multifamily residences here for whatever reason. But now I'm like, wait, why is that? Like, why is that the case? I love all of that content, the maps. I'm a visual learner. So seeing the connotation between the ER visits and asthma and redlining, and how those two are connected is even enlightening. I would love to keep you on here for a couple more minutes, Lou. If you guys have any questions, let's go for it. Unmute your mic. Let's see what we can figure out here tonight. No questions.
I have a question. This is Tiff.
Go ahead,
Tiffany.
Tiff.
On the zoning, and because you work for the city, Austin, can things get or is there a process for? I mean, clearly there probably is. I'm just so ignorant, but because a lot of the affordable housing is becoming a big thing in the real estate investing, and is the rezoning locations a difficult process, and how do investors go about doing that?
That's a great question. So just for clarity, so I don't work with the city, but my work, I'm involved with the city. So getting commercial build outs approved in certain areas based on zoning, that's my experience. In that sense, you can apply for rezoning based on what you want to do. I just know the city that I'm in, they drag their feet, and like they'll do everything they can to like it. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. It feels like they'll do everything they can to cause you to like give up halfway through the process. And so while there is a way and a process in order to have something rezoned, I just know from my experience, at least in my city, it is one of the most difficult things to do. If anyone else has experience with rezoning or trying to build on land that's not zoned for a specific thing, absolutely unmute your mic.
I don't have. Oh, go
don't
ahead.
have anything as encouraging.
Right.
I've also watched that
Exactly.
process where I am, and
it's
it's
a lot.
very
Mhm.
difficult to get things rezoned.
Yeah. Mike, what were you going to say?
I don't have experience, but we definitely have to look into it because being that we're in Philadelphia, they have certain cities. Of course, the worst sections of the cities are zoned commercial and multifamily, and the other sides of the city that were supposedly like the nicer sections are all single family. So what investors are doing is if they want single families, they're going to the city and asking for a variance. So that's what you do. You go to the zoning department, you ask for a variance. And Philly is actually being pretty responsive with answering the variances because we were trying to look into turning our house into a multifamily. It's zoned single. Just being straightforward on that one. But
one thing you have to at least that we encountered was at least here in Philadelphia, you're supposed to hit like certain what is it, depths and widths of the
Square
lot
footage
to be able-
of the lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
To
Yep.
be able to even apply or to get considered to change.
Yep.
I mean, it's so frustrating because you see small lots and they're multi and they're built
Oh, yes.
multi, so it's frustrating to see
Where
that.
The house, like the place that we're in, like as we speak right now that we rent, it's 15 feet wide by 70 feet long, and so it's like a like literally
Yeah.
like a block, like a little section, and it's been this whole block is zoned multifamily, so they didn't have to do a variance, but yeah, it's crazy that you can have a 15-foot wide by 70-foot long lot zoned for multifamily. It's wild.
That's a really big hallway. That is crazy. Any other questions? Oh, here's something funny. This isn't a question, but I just realized, I mean, there was 36 people who registered and there's 6 people on because I just looked at my Eventbrite and it says 5:30. 5:30 Pacific Standard Time, which is in 20 minutes. That's not a question. I just wanted to share that with you guys. Any other questions? Oh, man. It's this daylight savings time. I'm telling you. I'm going to blame daylight savings time and my kids for like ever.
So, Lucia, are you part of the nonprofit? Because what Austin does, it seems to me to be very aligning to a nonprofit, mentality at the same time. I think it's great. I haven't, since COVID, I've been on a lot of like real estate investing, calls and just trying to learn. My husband and I, we bought our first house here down in Southern California a long time. So we were blessed, but, learning what we know now and what we could have done then back in the day, we wish we probably would have known what we don't know today. It's just moving forward in investing. But are you more on the nonprofit side?
Yeah, I actually work for a definitely a for-profit company. So pretty corporate as far as my job, but I do a lot of work with nonprofits, and my company does a lot of work with nonprofits as well.
My mind's just turning.
Seriously, I think one of the reasons, so I don't know if you guys are on Facebook, but someone posted in Real Estate Rookie, they posted the cover of the book, The Color of Law, and there were like 50 people who responded and said, oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. And this is something that's been stirring inside of my wife and I for 2 years. We've always thought like, hey, we're going to help people own homes. And we don't even own our own home that we live in, but we just knew that we wanted to help other people own their home. And so kind of the direction that we're headed, Tiff, is that direction of a nonprofit. I'm in the process right now. There's a guy in Chicago who's doing something similar. I talked with him last week, and we have a follow-up call next week. But just to really understand what kind of local government programs are out there that can support an initiative like this. because as a real estate investor, you don't really hear about stuff like this, where people are, I mean, most people in real estate are thinking about financial independence. Like, I want to quit my job. That's their main focus. I want to be independent of my W-2. I want to buy back my time. I want to travel and go on a yacht. Like, that's what most of them are thinking. But there has to be, at least I would hope so, there has to be some kind of program in each city that would support an initiative, regardless of how you structure it, but something to help develop the city as well as give people another chance. And this is something that really moved in us is former President Obama had this quote where he said, "It's only when you hitch your wagon to something larger than yourself that you realize your true potential." And my thought has always been, my money, like the money that we make, has the potential not just to sit in a savings account. Like, it has the potential to really give people a second chance. And if I'm able to do that, then my time here living was well worth it. And so that's kind of what we're going after. Obviously, like I said, you still have to be profitable in some sense. But the hope is that by the end of this year, we're at about 15 to 20 families that we helped own a home or purchase a home, and connected with some different city programs. We've still got some time. If you have questions, or maybe you have an idea of something you've wanted to try, or something you've thought about maybe, but not an idea of how to actually make that happen, I'd love to just hear kind of what's going on in your head as you process all of this.
I would like to get into affordable housing. I'm pretty present on LinkedIn just for work, but I see that there's big funds, like a capital funds, that are going on to place affordable housing in inner city places. So I haven't found, just to kind of put my ear, because I'm slow at learning this. I mean, as far as like investing in a real estate and buy a piece of property, I could do that, but I'd rather learn not to have to put my money into it, something. But affordable housing for others, I am so interested in doing. I've been on affordable housing, which would be mobile homes. But I was listening to a podcast on that. And sometimes that's difficult because from a finance perspective, that you're basically financing a vehicle. That's what some of those there. And this was a big firm that has a lot of these properties. So, I think affordable housing is just it's kind of up and coming. I think it's already here, but it's a matter of the law. It's a matter of finances and the banks. Like, how does that all entail? And I don't know if anybody that's where my mind is, but I don't know if anybody's had any ideas on that.
Tiff, what I'm going to do after we get off this call, I have a buddy out here in the East Bay in Walnut Creek up here in Northern California that buys lots and builds the maximum amount of ADUs he can on the lot. And that's his way of helping to increase affordable housing, especially here in the Bay Area. And so I'll send his info over to you. And he'll answer any question you have, and he'll give his time for a phone call or whatever it is. But that's what he's been doing for the past year. And it looks like he's been able to build quite a few ADUs. I know that laws in California have recently changed in the past few years. So that's kind of expedited a lot of these developers who are coming in and building more ADUs on empty lots rather than like single family residences. So I'll send you his info for sure.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep.
I have a question. How's the deal going on with you and with Mike and you? How's that go?
There we go. Oh man, that's a fun one. So for those who don't know what deal we're talking about, I did a wholesaling workshop and gave away a warm lead for someone to walk through the process with me. And then the deal was at the end of everything that we would split whatever profit made 50-50 down the middle. And so we have the house under contract. We've talked to, gosh, a lot of buyers. And we've had a couple of people walk through, and we don't have a buyer yet. The agreement is set to close on the 18th, which is Thursday. And so what we have done is talk to the seller and asked her if she would consider an extension, which would give us another week. If we're unable to find an end buyer to assign it to, then the objective would be to, if you guys are familiar with Burr, I have a private lender. He would lend us the money to buy it, rehab it, get it rented, and then we'd refinance from there so that it would still be a profitable deal. But like I said in my last call, wholesaling is all about, any kind of real estate dealing is all about integrity and character. And so tomorrow morning, I'm going to be on the phone with our seller and let her know that our agreement did say we would close by Thursday. At this point, she can, if she would be so kind to, give us an extension. Otherwise, she does have the liberty to cancel the agreement because we wouldn't be able to execute on our end. And so that's where we are. Wholesaling isn't all pretty. I know people post their checks, their assignment fees, and flex with their rented luxury cars that they don't own. They don't own those guys. Don't worry. They don't own them. But it's not all pretty. There are some deals that are difficult to do. And honestly, this is probably the most difficult assignment I've worked on.
I'm going to pray for you guys.
Come on.
Thank you.
Mike needs it. He's going insane over there.
The excuses sometimes people say, it's crazy.
Right. Awesome. Any other ideas or questions in regards to using real estate to help and to combat what we just heard from Lucia? None. Awesome. Well, let's do this before we call it a night, and then I'm going to be back on here in 10 minutes. Before we call it a night, I just want to share a little bit about the family that we have at our rental in Clarksville. And then, Mike, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you were just talking about before we started our call about your family there in Philadelphia, your tenant that just moved in. This makes it all worth it for me. Is the family that just moved into our rental is a young family. They're in their mid-20s. Jamario, his wife, and their 3-year-old daughter. And the house that they just moved into is like it's basically like brand new. All brand new LVP paint, kitchen countertops, cabinets, everything brand new. And when they did their walkthrough, I had them on speakerphone when they did their walkthrough. And the moment they opened the door, all I heard was his wife, "Oh my gosh, look at these floors. Look at the paint. Look at the kitchen. Look at the countertops. Like, look at all of this stuff." And to me, that makes all the work that I did before that worth it. To hear someone else have a chance at getting into a home that they never thought they'd ever be able to get into. And knowing on the other end of that call that there's a great family who just needed someone to take a chance on them. And so for me, it's fulfilling in itself, whether they were profitable or not. That was like all the profit that I needed, just to hear the satisfaction in their voice, knowing that someone was going to help them out. Mike, you have a similar story, you and Jay.
Yep. So we just rented out our first rental about a week ago. And when we listed it for rent, we really didn't know what to expect. But we told each other that based on like the market and where we are, we have to take a holistic view on everybody. You know, like our minimum criteria is just no smoking and no evictions. But when it comes to credit score and stuff like that, we're pretty lenient, as long as, there was no, crazy stuff. So when we had the current tenant that we have in there walk in with her kids to sign the lease that day, her daughter, who's 14 years old, goes, Mom, there's actually 3 bedrooms here. I can have my first bedroom, my own bedroom for the first time ever. I don't have to sleep with you anymore. And like that was like, we and Jay like looked at each other and were like, wow, like, like that's crazy. And she goes, I just want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. She goes, I got denied by 30 people because of my credit score. And for the first time ever, I feel like I caught a break. And, like to me and Jay, like what our goal is for all of our rentals to be in like the best condition that they can be in, and for what we can afford to do. And our one thing is that we always tell each other, would we live here? If we wouldn't live here, then we won't rent it, because it's just not fair to whoever would move in, whether it's in a lower income neighborhood, which is where we mainly invest, or not. So it was just it's touching. She's probably like one of the most humble people that we've ever met. So it's.
And I think to add on to that, on the vetting perspective, we really did look for someone who was trying to, progress and shows that they were, making the payments. They had that record. So, yeah.
That's huge. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, guys. So it's 5:24 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which gives me 6 minutes before we have, I guess, the rest of the 36 people jump on. So here's what I want to say. I appreciate you all being here. I know you guys could have done anything else on a Sunday night, especially when our times could potentially be all messed up with daylight savings time. I just so believe in the power of 1 to 2 people being able to go out on a limb and give someone a second chance. And so any opportunity that you have that you want to talk about in the future, my Instagram is Rentals to Retirement. Message me there. I would love to help you any way I can. And I just believe that real estate could be the vehicle that we use to really see a difference in our nation. And so if you're down with that, I would love to help you in any way. Otherwise, you guys have a great night. That is the end. As I let more people on, this is going to be such a weird transition. But we're going to make it happen anyway. Here's more people. They're like, wait, it's ending? No, we all were here waiting for you the whole time. There we go. Hey, Iris, thanks for joining us. Uh-oh, her audio is connecting. There we go. Hello to Iris. Thanks for jumping on tonight.
Hello.
Iris, it's really funny is the reason there's people in the room is because I told some people it was at 4:30 and my Eventbrite says that it's at 5:30. So you get 10 bonus points for coming on at 5:30. I think the rest of the 36 people will be on with you. So this is going to be great. But don't worry, I've already run through the content once, so this time it's going to be perfect.
It's only 2:30 here. I'm in Hawaii.
Oh, which island are you on?
I'm on Kauai.
You are not on Kauai. Get out of here.
Yes, you got 2 Kauai people on.
Yes. Yeah. Me and Tiff are both from Kauai.
Kauai High School.
Oh, really?
My dad went to Kauai High too.
I'm from the other side of the island, on the east side. I grew up there and went to Kapa'a Elementary, middle, and high school. All 3 of them.
My family's from Kapa'a. I won't hold that against me.
Oh, man. You know what's funny is we had tickets to go there in March, the end of this month, and didn't know that there's a 10-day quarantine on Kauai. And our vacation was only 6 days. So I didn't want to spend my 6-day vacation in the hotel or in the resort. And so we canceled our tickets, but I just found out that they got approved to change their COVID regulations for visitors. And I think they said it starts the first week of April. So I'm going to go back online and buy those tickets again because I will be there this year for sure.
Yeah, April 5th, Kawakami took off the restriction. I think you still got a test though.
I'll take whatever test they need me to take. I'm going. No matter what, I will be there. Awesome. Thanks for jumping on. Iris, are you currently investing anywhere?
Not on Kauai, but I was looking at out of state investing. That's why I was trying to
Okay.
jump on and check out everybody who has stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't know that I would invest on Kauai either right now. I just looked up the house that I grew up in, and I think the estimated value was like 675 on the east side.
The median home price now is like $1 million.
And it's such a small island.
It's super small.
Oh, that's so frustrating. Oh man, I was telling my wife, that's why so many in Hawaii, that's why you have so many generations living with each other in the same house, because most people can't afford to buy it. So you have like grandparents, kids, grandkids, and great grandkids all living in the same house under one roof. It's so expensive there.
It is, and people are buying things sight unseen. I think there was a house that was right up the street for me. They listed at 400,000. They had 14 offers in 2 days, and the price is like crazy. Ooh. There's nothing under 500,000 at all.
Wow.
Even the townhouses or those condos and stuff, they're like 300,000-400,000.
Wow. That is insane. We should play a game. Who lives in the most expensive market? Yeah, Don raised his hand. Don, I think we might be there, all in the Bay. I think we might be there. I see. I'm not gonna say your last name because I'm gonna get it wrong. But Teresa
Michiano.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you say that because I'll still mess it up. Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And how old is your daughter?
She just turned 1. She's about 14 months.
Oh my goodness. I have an 18-month-old. And yeah, I get it. I understand.
You don't see the rest of the house.
Right. Exactly. I've got 3 boys. They're 6, 4, and 1. Oh, and wow. They're all outside because otherwise it wouldn't be good if they were in here. They'd be climbing on me. You'd hear them fighting. They'd probably say something super embarrassing. So just leave them outside. They're fine. And where are you guys calling in from?
San Diego.
Oh, cool. Okay. Which part of San Diego?
Central San Diego. Okay. We're probably like, I work at Balboa Park, so we're about like 10, 15 minutes away from Balboa Park.
Nice. We always go to Balboa Park when we're down there. My wife has family in, La Jolla, in Carlsbad, and in one other part that I can't remember. But yeah, we're always at Balboa Park. That's awesome.
Yeah, let us know when you guys are down here.
Yeah, for sure. Are you guys currently investing anywhere?
We have the triplex here.
Oh, cool.
And that's pretty much it. We're looking to pretty much get direct to seller, and then maybe look into some LA deals, but it's all depending on numbers,
Yeah, absolutely. And how are you guys going direct to seller?
Right now we kind of going with the like a sniper approach with direct to mailers to probates.
Cool.
We've only sent our first campaign right now, and then we plan on buying more from the county and then sending our next batch.
Nice. That's awesome, man. How are you finding those probates, those leads?
It's all online.
Okay.
I'm paying probably like a hefty amount for the county records.
Sure.
So like, I think a week worth of records is like $150. But then I'll manually get all the info that we need, and then we'll just write them a letter, handwritten. We'll do a blue ink signature, and I think we're going to start incorporating the cold calls with those. We want to get the timing right. We don't want to call right after death or right after filing. So we're going in with the generic script, so we shouldn't be bringing it up unless they are bringing it up. So
right. Absolutely.
Just kind of thinking it through and everything.
Nice. That's awesome. And then we have Dawn. Dawn's a fellow Bay Area. Are you at work, Dawn?
Good evening. No, I actually just got home a little while ago. I thought this meeting was at 4:30 because that's what it popped up on my calendar.
We
I was
have
like
4:30, 5:30, whenever you want to be on. We'll just
I
be
know.
here.
I was like, oh man. I made 4:35 because we left Stockton like at 3. So
You guys have a tournament out there?
yeah.
Oh man, they finally opened up the fields up here, and they were practicing.
Good.
We were out at the park today, so
Yeah.
I think it's getting there.
Yep.
Oh, okay, so Teresa, that was you that just asked for the link. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I get everything. I have a couple more messages just to make sure that people can get in. Is Laura in here? No, so hold on one second. Okay. And then I think Jackie, were you were not at the 4:30, right?
Oh, hi. No, I wasn't
Okay,
at the
great.
4:30. I saw the 4:30, but I was like, oh
I
no, mine is
know.
later.
It's technology. I don't mix well with technology.
No, it's all good. I was like already at 7:30, but I'm over in Georgia, so it's like 8:30
Oh
here.
wow. Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness.
Uh-huh.
Are you investing there in Georgia as well?
Yes, we just came back from Germany because like my husband's active duty military,
Oh, cool. Okay.
and we got our first house now. We're trying to, so we are renovating that a little bit, and then we try to house hack, get a roommate.
Okay.
Later
Yeah.
on, we're gonna rent that out because we will be moving in 9 to 10 months already again.
Got it.
But we are trying to find something more here. It's like the neighborhood is like, I would say like a C plus, B minus
it.
here. But Columbus, Georgia is really interesting. So you have one road, it's really looking good, and then you just like go around the corner and it's like, I don't
Night
know
and day,
where I
huh?
am.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we're trying to find something which is like which we can make a little bit nicer. Appreciation here is not that high, so it's
Right.
more
Cash
yeah,
flow
trying
and-
to find cash
Yeah.
flow. And we just like funny thing, we met our new neighbor, and
Mhm.
she's military too. She just got the house next to us, and she's originally from Columbus area.
Okay.
She's trying to make the neighborhood a little bit nicer too.
Oh wow.
So she bought the house just for investing too, and just
Oh,
like
cool.
give people a little bit nicer houses, because when you look on Facebook Marketplace, what people are renting out here, it's horrible.
Oh really?
Like, yeah, it's so
Jeez.
shitty and overpriced,
Mm.
or like I would never want to live in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like where I'm like having a hard time.
Yep.
Like, I don't want to be a landlord like that.
Right. Yeah. I looked at it was early last year. I looked at a portfolio at a small town in Ohio, Springfield, and the owner had he had 6 homes, and he said they were all rent ready. And so I had an inspector go by, and there were literal holes in the floor, like holes. You could go through the hole
Yeah.
in the floor. And I called him and I said, "Hey, my inspector said that you just have holes in the floors." And his response was, "Yeah, but I can rent that out tomorrow." And in my man, that did not sit well with me. Needless to say, I didn't do business with him. But I think that's kind of what you're getting to is like, if I think Mike said it on our last call, if you can't live there, if you wouldn't want to live there, like, why would you move someone else in to live there? It's just, to me, it's unethical. It's just a poor reflection of that person's character. And yeah, I mean, sure, you can get anyone to rent a property anywhere, really. But man, I
Yeah,
can't do it.
I can't do it either. So that's like where I have like a hard time also in other groups to see where people are like, oh, it's a rental, you don't need to do anything. Where I'm like, no, I want to make places nice too for people. Give them a
Yes,
chance and not just rent it out.
exactly.
Because
Exactly.
we looked at another duplex. It was posted and the guy said, yeah, it has about 15,000 in repairs to do, but we looked at it and like almost every window was broken. It smelled like pee inside the whole
Oh, yes.
thing. Yeah, you would
Yeah,
have just like
it's
get
more
on your house
common.
there.
Yeah, it's more common than we like to admit as real estate investors. And the idea of not over rehabbing or not over renovating is absolutely true, but I do think you have to make it livable for people.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I think that's where they get the idea of being a slumlord, not a landlord.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's so sad to see because like that does not really sit well with me. Where I have to
Right.
like, oh no, I don't want to do that.
and that's why we're on this call. We want to be able to
Absolutely.
provide rentals and spaces for people that they can be proud of and enjoy. And so we're going to get kicked off. My name is Austin. I am your host today. Very simple. Let me see if I can get this even working. Oh, it won't work. Shucks. My camera died halfway through our last call, my actual camera. So I'm going to do it here. I don't have all of my visuals that I would use to kind of help you guys track with me. Very simply, I'm just going to go over my story, me and my wife, how we got involved in real estate and what we're after today. I'm going to walk you through our first deal, which is a rent-to-own deal, and kind of tell you the story of our tenant buyers. And then we're going to hear from a good friend of mine, Lucia, who has a lot of, just one of the most well-read and like, if I ever have a question about anything like this, she's the person that I would ask. Like, I trust her and the education that she has and how much she's sought after figuring this out and the passion that she has. And so I really admire her for that. And so we're going to hear a little bit from her. And then at the end of it, I just want to unmute everyone's mic at the end. And I just want to answer questions. And I want us to collaborate. I think we all probably have small ideas of what we want to do. But when we get those ideas around other like-minded people, that's when they really come to shine. That's when we're able to put legs to the ideas and the dreams and the visions that we have. So we'll have some time at the end to do that. But let me walk you through really quick kind of what my wife and I's journey has looked like. So in 2019, my wife and I were getting ready to have our third son. We have 3 boys. They're 6, 4, and 1. And we thought we need to buy a house. That's what you do when you have 3 kids. You buy a house because you need more space for them to run around and get tired for nap time. As a parent, if you're a parent on this call, you know we work for that nap time. And so we submitted a mortgage application, and only to find out that in the Bay Area where we live, we were not able to qualify for a home. And you can imagine, as a husband and as a dad, it was pretty embarrassing. It was disappointing. And it was probably one of the most shameful moments I've had in my life to look at my wife after being denied and say, hey, we can't buy a house. But if you know me, I do not do well with sitting still. So after I sulked in my sorrows for about 5 minutes, I jumped on Google like every good millennial, and I researched how many people's mortgage applications get denied a year. In 2019 alone, almost 11% of all mortgage applications were denied. To put that in perspective, that's 1.6 million applications. 1.6 million families in America were told they can't buy a home. And so we got to thinking, and we came up with this goal to help 1,000 home renters become homeowners over the next 25 years through creative financing like lease options and rent to own. And so that's what we're doing now. Our first rent to own deal is here. 1515 Glennon Drive in Clarksville, Tennessee. we were able to purchase this home through seller financing with the seller there locally. He had just recently renovated the home, done new flooring, new paint, new electrical panel, new plumbing lines, new windows with a warranty. The roof was in great condition. The landscaping was great. And so we were able to purchase this on seller financing. In order to keep with our goal of helping home renters become homeowners, we found a tenant buyer. His name is Jamario. Him, his wife, and his 3-year-old daughter now live in that home on a rent-to-own deal. And so how that works is essentially we have them do a down payment. They do pay a little higher elevated rent. And then what we do at the end of our term, which is 2 years with them, is we say, hey, for 2 years, if you can really hone in and kind of increase your credit score, what we'll do is we'll give you back your down payment, and we'll give you back the 20% in elevated rents that we're charging you. And you can apply that to your down payment with a traditional lender. And so for 2 years, we're going to save his down payment. We're going to save 20% over market rent in an account. And at the end of those 2 years, if he qualifies for a mortgage, we're going to give all of that back to him so that he can get started in owning his home and building wealth for his family. The other thing that we do, which kind of separates us from most rent-to-own models, and this is how we distinguish being profitable without being predatory, is we enroll all of our clients in a credit repair program out of pocket. My wife and I pay for it just to help them get back on track. Most of these tenant buyers, well, they're not bad people. Most of them just made bad decisions early on. And so their credit decisions they made way early on are still affecting them to this day. That, and a lot of people just don't know how to manage credit. And so what we do is we try to give them the most amount of resources and tools we can to make sure that at the end of 2 years that they will qualify for a mortgage. Our qualifications for our tenant buyers are very simple. 2.5 times the monthly rent and a 580 credit score. We picked 580 because I know in 2 years you can get from 580 to 620, which is what most lenders are requiring at least. I've done it from 580 to 680 in about a year, so I know that someone can go from 580 to 620 in 2 years. That is essentially the process that we went through to acquire the home and to place a tenant buyer. Now, I know I went through that super quick, so I want to leave a couple of minutes here for you to ask questions, maybe how I found the deal, why I picked Clarksville, how we screened our tenant, anything you have to ask. Now is your chance. I'll answer a question that wasn't asked, but I'll answer it anyway. Austin, how did you pick Clarksville, Tennessee? It wasn't very analytical. My wife and I looked at a map. We looked at cities that we wouldn't mind retiring in. One of them was Nashville. Nashville's too expensive, so we looked at a secondary market, which is Clarksville. Since this idea has kind of evolved, we are going to start taking a more analytical approach. We have a list of the top 10 cities with the lowest home ownership rate. That's going to be taken into account when we select our markets. And then the second list is the top 10 cities that have the lowest home ownership rate for minorities. And so we are taking a more analytical approach as time progresses, but early on we just picked a market and we just found a deal. Another question that wasn't asked, but I'll answer now, is how we screen tenant buyers to make sure that they're in a good position to buy in 2 years. So we use a software called avail.co. It has a credit check in the application, background check, eviction report, and a criminal history. And so it'll show us everything we need to see in order to make a decision about a tenant buyer. What we look for is progress, or how long ago these accounts or whatever it is that shows up on the report are dated. And so if we see something that's, 7 years ago, it doesn't play too big of a part or make too big of an impact on our decision. But if we see something from last year, then we have to consider that. The other thing is, progress. The last thing. This is the ultimate deal breaker. This is how we make all decisions after all of that happened. I just ask my wife, and whatever she says, we just do it. That's kind of how it goes. If you're on this call and you're a husband like I am, that's probably the best advice I could give you. I do have some questions here in the chat. Do you have boots on the ground in your market? Yes, Teresa, I do. Very briefly, here's the kind of the three things that I need as far as personnel in a market. I need a runner, and a runner is anyone who can do any kind of errand. I have a runner in Dayton, Ohio, and Clarksville, Tennessee. And so these people bring contracts to sellers or buyers to have them sign. They go and take pictures. They'll figure out what title company we need to use. They literally do all the work that I would do if I were there locally. But because they're local, they have a little bit of an advantage. So I have a runner. I have a contractor to get a better idea of repair and rehab estimates. And then the last thing that I need there, but I don't necessarily use, is a realtor. And realtors I use to get a CMA or a competitive market analysis for each home that I'm looking at, just so that I know, kind of based on appreciation, what price this home should be in or what it could sell for. So again, boots on the ground. I have a runner, a contractor, and a realtor. And then Jackie's question is, do you find the tenant who wants to do own to lease before getting the property? No. So Jackie, here's the crazy thing. There are so many people in our country who would love to buy a home, but can't. So finding a tenant buyer is not the hard part. The hard part is just acquiring a property. I posted our home there in Clarksville on Facebook Marketplace and had about 300 people inquire. 300. Now, when I sent out kind of the minimum qualifications, it did filter a lot of those people, and we only actually looked at about 12 applications. And so the amount of buyers is, I mean, there's so many out there. The hard part is acquiring the property. If you have any questions, go ahead and unmute. And then,
hey Austin, this is Erwin,
Yep.
Teresa's husband. I was just gonna ask. I think I saw something about you using PropStream. Kind of how are you finding your cold leads or warm leads? And pretty much, because I've seen this before, but I really like how the way you brought it in, where you bring in credit repair, and then you're actually helping your tenant buyer acquire the property, and that it eventually ends up you being cashed out in the property, correct?
Sure. Yep. So I mean, if you're talking about like what lists I pull through PropStream, it's pretty simple. I look for a high equity home ownership of at least 5 years, which would go hand in hand with high equity. It should be at least 30% equity in a home, but I'm not too strict on that. The way that I set up acquisitions is a little different. My thought is this: however I need to buy the home, I will. Like, however it needs to happen. If the seller wants to do seller financing, let's make that happen if they own it outright. If the seller has a mortgage but can't make the payments, let's do a sub-2. We'll figure that out. If it's cash, let's buy it cash. Like, however it needs to happen. I don't stick to one specific way of acquiring properties. I'm more strict on the rent-to-own part of it on the back end.
What's usually your process when buying? If they're asking for cash, I'm assuming because it's in a different market, not in California, you're able to do hard money, guessing 25%.
Yeah. So hard money, private money, cash. Again, it's really whatever fits that situation the best. You can find some good hard money lenders. I would say if you find a really good one, hang on to them, treat them well, because there's not many good hard money lenders out there. But yeah, I think it sounds really simple, and maybe not like the most comprehensive answer. But really, however I need to get into the house, I will.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So let's do this. If you have any more questions, put them in the chat. I want to give time for Lucia to kind of run through some content, very eye-opening content. So if you're a note taker, go ahead and take notes. She does have some visuals that'll pop up on the screen as well. Let me see if I can set this up, Lucia.
I can also just do it straight into Zoom if that's easier.
Okay, perfect. Let's do that then.
Okay. All right, so hello everyone. So Austin asked me to join this Zoom because he let me know that a bunch of you all had read The Color of Law and were interested in talking about it. And I said, oh my gosh, that's such a cool book. Like, I've read it. It's crazy. Happy to talk about it. And I would say the first thing that really stuck out to me about that book was that every region that I have lived or worked in was called out by name in that book. Like, it felt very relevant for me. But if you haven't read it, don't worry. I'll summarize it here. But really, kind of the summary of what Richard Rothstein talks about in this book is we have this idea, like almost this myth, that segregation in housing exists because people had private practices and preferences, and kind of on their own, they wanted to live in a way that was more segregated, versus what he's actually saying happened, that it wasn't de facto segregation just by custom, but it was what he called de jure segregation. And de jure means that it was deliberate government action. There's actually law around this to make sure that these regions were segregated. And so really what happened because of this segregation was that it confined African Americans and also other ethnic groups to intentionally under-resourced neighborhoods, and it really prevented home ownership as well in a lot of these communities. And so I think that, going through some of the big pieces of it that stuck out to me that I think are a good survey of the book as a whole is the New Deal. That was kind of the first one. So if anyone remembers US history, to summarize, we had World War II, and when the veterans came back from the war, the government had a program that allowed them to buy homes with government subsidized loans, finance loans. So it was a lot more affordable. It was doable for people who hadn't previously been able to own homes. So this home ownership actually was the beginning of what we now know as the middle class, or what we call like the growth of the middle class. But the catch with this was that FDR's administration only loaned this money for people to get mortgages in neighborhoods that were predominantly white. So people who were wanting to move into Black neighborhoods, often predominantly Asian neighborhoods, Latino neighborhoods, they couldn't get mortgages to take advantage of these benefits. And so I heard that probably one of the most startling numbers was that an estimated, I think 2% of these benefits actually went to non-white homeowners, which is kind of a shocking number, 2%. And so I wanted to share a story because I always think that stories are a good way to really highlight data. If you do too much data, it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around. But we talked about Ohio. I heard somebody say something about Dayton, Ohio, and that's where my dad's side of the family is from. And so when my great uncle, so his uncle came back, I can't remember all the lineage, but my great uncle, when he came back from World War II, he wanted to buy a home in the area where they grew up, and they couldn't. So he either wasn't able to get a mortgage in the areas that he was interested in, or people just straight up said, I will not, or I cannot sell this home to you. So there's this government benefit that he wanted to take advantage of. He went to fight for the United States military, right? He did all this work, risked his life, came home, couldn't buy a house. Fortunately, one of his army buddies was an architect. And so because of that, he actually had some say into who owned these houses, and he was able to buy a house because he was friends with the architect, right? And how many architects do you all know who build houses? None. At least I don't. And so this was his way of becoming, those 2% of people who were able to get these homes. And so thinking about, some of the ways that the government actually took action to lock people out of homeownership, I'll just highlight a few examples from the book that I thought were the most striking to me. One of them was zoning. So I had always thought that zoning was something that cities just did to make sure their city was planned well and organized. And what I learned from this book is Richard Rothstein actually says that in a lot of cases, zoning was developed so that the government could find ways to segregate their cities without putting in racialized language that would be in violation of the law. So one of the examples was single family residence versus a multifamily residence. And so they knew that if they made an area only single family residence, it would minimize the number of people of color who would be able to be sold those apartments or would be able to get the financing to move into those apartments. Sometimes they would zone these multifamily neighborhoods. They would also zone them for things like factories and chemical processing plants. So multifamily zoning would actually get lumped into a lot of other services and zoning that would make these neighborhoods a less healthy place to live. Another thing that would happen that was totally legal is what's called restrictive covenants. And so this is in the deed of a property. So literally in the language of the deed, it says, okay, if you own this house, you commit that you will not sell this house to anybody who's not white. And so that is now illegal, but that language is actually in the deed still of a lot of homes. So there's people today that I know of who have bought homes that have language of restrictive covenants in the deed of their house, which is pretty wild. Another way that the government would allow for segregation to occur is that if someone beat the odds where they actually were able to get a loan, they found someone who was willing to sell the house to them, they got around the zoning, they got around the restricted covenants, sometimes they would buy a house and there would be mobs of people camped on the lawn ready to protest them moving into this house. There's cases of burnings, bombings, people who lived in Alabama during the 50s and 60s nicknamed Birmingham Bombingham. That was the nickname of the city because so many homes were bombed when Black families would try to move into them, and they actually had the highest, I think it was the highest number of unsolved bombings in the country were in Birmingham in that time. And so that was another way that the government would kind of approve of some of these actions. And there were times when some of these riots and burnings and bombings would happen, and the homeowners or the people who sold the home would find themselves getting arrested for inciting a riot. So after they went through all of this, somebody firebombed their house, they would get arrested for inciting a riot. So that's another way. And so these are just an overview of a few examples of the way that the government would allow for segregation or actually legislated segregation. And another quite common way too was that local governments, city governments would put up barriers anytime that somebody wanted to build a housing development that wasn't segregated. So they would increase the price of the permits by like 1,000%, or they would say, hey, you can have the water hookup, but we increase the price of the water hookup by 10%. You still want to pay it? Or, hey, we're actually not going to give you a permit to build this unless you segregate it. So those were some other ways. So I have another story that kind of highlights the impact of this. And I have a friend who grew up in LA. So for those of you who are in SoCal, if it makes you feel better, everybody's region gets called out in the color of law. So all of us find ourselves in a region with this history. But his parents really had two neighborhoods that they were trying to buy a house in. They had one option in Inglewood, which is at the time was a predominantly Black neighborhood, and the other option was Westwood, which is where UCLA is. And nobody would sell them a house in Westwood, even though they cost about the same. So it wasn't an issue of financing. And so they ended up buying the house in Inglewood. And I was looking up what home prices were like in LA, and the average home sold for $100,000 in the 80s, which in 2021 dollars would be $340,000. I would love to buy a house in LA for $340,000. I see my Bay Area people sweating like that's crazy. But now the average house in Inglewood is worth $670,000, and the average house in Westwood is $1.5 million. So just from them not being able to buy that house in Westwood, that's almost $1 million in wealth that their family doesn't have now because of housing segregation. So I'm going to project, and actually, Austin, if you can make me the host for just a couple minutes while I project these visuals. I'm a visual learner. So for those of you who listen to lectures and your brain starts coming out of your ears a little bit, that's okay. I feel you. I can be like that sometimes. And so what I'm about to show you is actually a map of what we call redlining. So let me project so you can see it. But redlining is the practice of the government would actually do this. They would send surveyors out to different neighborhoods, and neighborhoods that they deemed high risk, in other words, these are the neighborhoods that were predominantly Black, they marked them in red. In neighborhoods that were predominantly white, they marked them in green. And so if a neighborhood was red, they would then tell not only the subsidized loans that the government put out, but they would recommend to any loaning agency that they should not issue mortgages in those neighborhoods. And if they did, they should charge higher rates. So this is Pittsburgh. So these maps were typically developed in the 30s and 40s. So this was the map that the government put together of Pittsburgh to determine which neighborhoods they were going to help people get mortgages in and which neighborhoods people were not going to be allowed to own homes. So you can see the areas marked in green. Blue was typically less desirable than green, but a little bit more. Yellow often meant that there was potential, like, hey, this neighborhood has some people of color moving into it. We think it could be a neighborhood of color, so be wary of issuing loans in this area. And red was often predominantly Black neighborhoods, but it could be a predominantly Latino or Asian neighborhood as well, where the government would say, we're not issuing loans, and we're going to recommend that private banks do not issue loans in these neighborhoods. So this still has an impact even today with the way some of our cities look. This is Richmond, Virginia. And so on the left, you'll see the redlining map there as well. So you see the red, yellow, blue, green. And on the right, you see something called the Social Vulnerability Index. I can't say that word today, Vulnerability Index. And so this is a number that really aggregates things like poverty rate, risk of diabetes, rates of asthma, of different factors like that, like how vulnerable are these communities. And it issues a score of 0 to 1, 1 being the most vulnerable. So you can see that social vulnerability and housing grades, it's almost a 1-for-1 correlation, right? It's kind of wild when you look at it. And as we talked about earlier, some of this is the loss of wealth, but some of this were also things like these redline neighborhoods where it was actually legal to put a chemical processing facility there that was dumping chemicals into the water, but in the green neighborhoods, it was not okay. So that contributed to some of this as well. And the last map I'll show you is the Bay Area. So this is where I'm from. My city is on this map where I was born and where I was raised. And so on the left, you see the redlining map again. And on the right, you see the rate of asthma-related emergency room visits for every 10,000 residents. So the more visits there are, that correlates with the redline neighborhoods, which is also pretty intense when you think about it. And this was a study conducted by UC Berkeley, which is in a I guess, a green lined neighborhood, we would call it. And these are some of the results of what they saw. All right, so I will stop screen sharing and I will give Austin, I will make you the host again.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Lou.
Yeah, and so I know that this was all kind of some intense information, so to wrap it up with something a little more encouraging and uplifting. You know, I know sometimes you can look at this and you're like, but I'm not the government. Like, what am I even supposed to do with this? Like, if the government did this, you know, a certain number of years ago, what can I do now? But I think the first thing that I would encourage everyone to do is just to learn your local history. So learn the history of your city, your neighborhood, your region, your state. You can Google some of these maps. So you can look up one of these redlining maps in your city and see what that looks like. You can learn about some of the lending disparities in your region and how those came to be. And once you know that, that probably gives you a better idea of what city or what issues you feel the most passionate about. And I would encourage you to look for local organizations or government programs that are focused on reversing the effects of redlining. And some of them are really in depth and are requiring a lot of work and attention and care as needed. It's very complex. And some of the solutions are actually pretty simple. There's a nonprofit that has been encouraging businesses and other nonprofits to bank with Black-owned banks. So to put some of their savings in a Black-owned bank, you know, up to the FDI insured number. And these banks have higher rates of lending to people of color, especially African Americans. So they loan more money to Black-owned businesses and they offer more mortgages to Black families. So at a much higher rate than like a typical Fortune 500 bank. And so by putting money in this bank, it gives them more capital to then lend into a lot of these communities that have been historically redlined. And that's zero risk and basically requires the work of changing a bank. And that injects capital into some of these communities. So that's an example of some of the simple things that people are doing. But Austin already talked about some of those things that he's doing, like looking at neighborhoods with low percentages of homeownership, looking at historically redlined neighborhoods and cities and what we can do there. And so the more you learn and kind of dig into this, you'll find a lot of really cool ways across the spectrum of things that you can do to combat the effects of redlining.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just put in the chat. So we did this same call at 4:30 because for some reason, I thought this call was at 4:30. You guys were right. I was wrong. But this is the second time going through it. And the content is still something that I can't wrap my head around. And it wasn't very long ago that these kinds of practices were normal. It wasn't centuries ago. It was, I mean, honestly, in the context of history, it was very recently. And so I look at that. I look at the 9 people that are on this call, and I just imagine what kind of impact or change we can make collectively if each of us just did something. And I'm not saying that you need to go into lower income areas and start flipping houses and make them affordable housing projects. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you need to build ADUs on empty plots of land. But I do think that the power that's in all of us taking one step can make a huge difference. And so what I'd like to do is, if you have any questions or comments, maybe you've read The Color of Law, to unmute your mic. I'd love to hear your input and your feedback.
Lucia, this is Erwin again with Teresa's husband. Sorry, we're on her account. So I love hearing information like this. And it kind of goes back to Austin, your type of investing is super purposeful, you know, like just helping people actually qualify for homes and everything. I wanted to hear some of your thoughts. I've kind of been going through my head, and I've kind of seen gentrification as maybe kind of automation is how I relate it. If I can go a little bit more into it, I think like automation is something we kind of don't want to stop
because it just helps us moves us forward. So gentrification does make houses or neighborhoods safer, but it's like they're also the cons to it. I kind of wanted to hear what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, gentrification. I can't remember if he talked about it in the book, but I've heard Richard Rothstein talk about it. He says it's almost like the reverse of housing segregation. It like flips around and it kind of comes back with some of the similar problems. But for those of you who don't know what that word means, this is when typically like a predominantly minority neighborhood gets developed, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then the rents increase where it's a little more affordable for people who didn't historically live in that neighborhood. But then the rents and housing prices become so high that the people who grew up there are no longer able to afford living there, which is not, it's kind of complicated to figure out what's the solution to that. But, I would say that the solution to redlining probably is not gentrification. That probably wouldn't be where we're going with that. And so, even in thinking about who we're selling these homes to, right? Because sometimes gentrification happens and I work in tech, so these are my people, right? It's like, I want to sell a house. There's this tech person who's offering me $1.5 million cash, and I can just sell it and move it and be done. Because it's the simplest, it's the fastest. And so oftentimes people will go that route, which is different from what I hear a lot of folks on this call talking about with like, how do I get somebody rent to own? How do I boost somebody's credit score, right? All of these things which make it more affordable for people to historically live in the neighborhood to own some of these homes. So just being intentional, I think, about where these resources are going and how we're feeding back into that specific community, right? Like, even if it's, I have a friend who lives in New York. She's not from New York. She didn't grow up there, but she brought a coffee shop with the goal of this coffee shop being to serve the people who lived in the community and have grown up there. It's in Harlem, right? So like, yes, like she wasn't even from Harlem, but somebody financed that property for her. She bought it from someone. They helped her renovate it, right? But then she does it to pour back into the community. So even from that sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone buying a house who didn't grow up there, that there's anything inherently wrong with it. But it's just thinking about like, how are we using resources and these investments to give back to a community instead of things that change it that make it accessible to the people who historically lived there.
Yeah, that's good, Lou. I think it's Irwin, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think a big thing, something I appreciate about you all being on this call is most real estate investors, especially in the online world, they invest. It looks like they invest to be able to afford things that they can then post online and flex about. And what I appreciate everyone on this call for is you all came in here knowing that kind of the content was the complete opposite. What I've found is that when we talk about gentrification and people moving into these cities and then these families being displaced because they can't afford it anymore, I think, like Lucia said, I don't think gentrification inherently it's not wrong for someone to buy a house and raise the property values. I think where society goes wrong is that we're not equipping these families with financial tools or means in order to stay there and to improve the condition of their own neighborhood. So this family that I've placed in this house in Clarksville, like, what other landlord is going to enroll you in a credit repair program? Like, no one else is going to do that. And that's not to toot my own horn, but that's because I actually want this guy to be able to put himself in a better position financially so that he doesn't end up in the same place again. And so it's these tools that we call financial literacy that I think personally are what displace families the most. I don't know that it's necessarily people coming in and wanting to buy houses. I think that contributes to it, but I just don't think they have tools. And I know there's people who are going to jump in the call and say, well, there's all these programs for them. There's all these programs. Well, here's a good example. I grew up on pretty much every government program you can be on. I mean, we had food stamps when they were actual food stamps. They weren't like fancy plastic cards anymore where you can kind of swipe it and pretend that you're not on food stamps because it looks like a debit card. Like, we had actual food stamps. And I remember going to food banks and standing in line and seeing my classmates volunteer at the food banks. And like, the people I'm going to go to school with tomorrow are giving me this old stale cheese and like Kix. You guys eat Kix cereals? No, nobody eats Kix cereal because that's what you donate. You guys eat fruit cocktail from a can? No, because that's what you donate. And I remember all of these government programs. Here's the hardest thing about being in that kind of a lifestyle or upbringing is you just don't know what's available to you. It's not that you don't want to take advantage of the programs that are available to you. You just don't know. And so to be on one side and say, oh, there's all these programs you can enroll in and you can get this help and you can get that help, most people just don't know. They don't know that there's these programs out there for them. And if they do know, I'll say at the same time, I've seen my mom apply for programs and then be denied. The same programs that people told her to apply for, and get told, oh, you make $1,000 too much. Or you live just outside of the area that we really help. Sorry, we can't help you. And so while there are programs that are funded by the government and local government and cities, I don't know that that's all we can do. I think there's more that we can do to actually make an impact. And that's kind of the reason we made this call. I'd love if anyone else wants to jump in and share kind of their thoughts on what we're talking about.
Austin, I really agree with you. I'm still in the military. I'm going through a transition, and a big thing that we have is a TSP, which is pretty much a retirement account. And when I was in Japan, I was actually teaching financial classes to as many sailors as I can, and I was appalled by up all the way through the ranks, whether it was the newly person from just straight out of boot camp to people who've been in for 22 years, they didn't really know how to fully utilize their TSP. And I'm not here to badmouth the Navy, but it's not like they advertise one of the best financial tools that every military service member could have had. So I took some time. Any free time I had was going just being reserving a classroom on the carrier and just trying to put out that information and having them retire at 65 as a millionaire at least, because that would be the basis or the start for them to start for financial independence or whatever.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that, Erwin. We've got a little more time, so I want to give you guys time if you have any more questions or comments or feedback regarding our content tonight. Would love to hear from you. And then a follow-up question would be this: how does what we talk about tonight, or how does the content of this either challenge the way you're looking at investing or change the way you're looking at investing?
For me, it kind of changed my thoughts on the rent to own thing. Like, we had heard about it, but it just seemed like probably hard to find those kind of people that want to rent. But everything that you're saying just makes so much sense of, like, of course there's people out there that need it and want it, and it kind of depends on the market or like area. But for me, I think that's what a big takeaway from tonight is, because, you know, we're trying to get on the same mindset of everything. And that one especially was where like I get kind of worried about going into that. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I would say this, a lot of people who qualify are looking for rent to own. I have a friend here in Northern California who had to do a short sale on their home, which messes up their credit for 7 years. But they made, I mean, median income here in the Bay Area, is it like around 60,000 or something? Is like median higher? Good
Might
Lord.
even be higher.
Jeez. So they're making like above the median income, but they had to short sell a home. And so the credit just looks terrible. So they can't qualify for a mortgage through a traditional lender. Now, what do you do in that case when you have all of this money and good income, but the lender just sees that credit score and says, oh, you had a short sale, we can't do it. And so it's not necessarily just families who have or who live in low income areas. It's all kinds of families. It's not one specific demographic. There are tons of people out there who need to be in a rent to own position. We had 300 people inquire when we listed our house in Clarksville. 300 people who need to find a rent to own home. And so they're out there. Yeah, I think we just need to figure out how to find out where they are, really.
This might be a long-ended answer for the end of the webinar, but is there a way that you pick secondary markets? I feel like sometimes it's just throwing a dart at the map sometimes, but we haven't really figured out what secondary market we would want to go into.
That's a good question, and yes, that's my answer. No, I'm just kidding. Is there a market that you guys have thought about?
We've looked at around Orlando, Florida.
Okay.
We looked around Memphis, and even Ohio. Now that we have family members and they're also getting into real estate, they could be potentially our runners. Those markets.
Nice. Which part of Ohio are they in? I might need to hire them.
They're like a little bit below Cincinnati. I don't remember the.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. We have some stuff in Dayton that we're getting ready to do. We have a house under contract in Dayton right now, actually, East Dayton. And so we're looking in that area, and Cincinnati. Those are good markets to be in because it's still growing and hasn't developed fully. Some super basic criteria is, so let's call it, let's say you pick Orlando. Let's say that. So what I look for is a 30 to 40 minute drive to Orlando. So however you draw that radius around the city. Yeah. I look for at least 100,000 minimum population. I look for 2 of 3 things: a military base, a university, or a major hospital. So as long as the city has 2 of those 3 things, because now I'm diversifying where the job market is. And if one industry falls, I know that there's still a stable economy there. Orlando, I think, is the popular secondary market there is Kissimmee. And I've never personally invested there. I just know some people who have. So maybe that's a good place to start looking. But that's what I look for. Okay. 2 of the 3, hospital, university, military base, 100,000 minimum population, 30 to 40 minute drive into the city.
Thank you. If I can ask one more question.
You cannot, Erwin. No more questions from Just kidding. Go ahead, man.
I think the question that I was going to ask was relating to how do you know when it's official? Because sometimes when I'm looking at off market, I get in contact with the realtor, but it doesn't really go as far as that. And, you know, it doesn't really feel official. Like, when do I know I'm into the market? Or is it when I'm talking to sellers trying to do a contract? Like, are you getting in contact with title companies? Sometimes for me, it just doesn't feel I'm officially investing into the market until maybe I talk to someone from there and they can give me a little bit more kind of the boots on the ground perspective.
Yeah, I would say personally, you know you're investing in the market when you actually sign a purchase agreement.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're just calling people. I
Yeah.
would say you do want to start getting stuff ready, right? And so, say you're looking at Kissimmee or another Orlando submarket. I would line up a title company just because. I would start talking to realtors. I would start talking to property management companies. Those are kind of the tasks that actually get you to your goal.
Mm-hmm.
You can listen to the podcasts and you can read the blogs and everything, but until you get on the phone, I mean, yeah, I don't think anything else is going to be as valuable for you.
Well, appreciate it, Austin. Thank you.
Yeah, man, for sure. All right, I've got 2 minutes. 2 minutes left before my wife gets back with sushi. So, any questions you guys have in regards to redlining, using real estate investing as a vehicle to help people, anything at all? I'm no professional, but I will share what I do know. Erwin's about to ask another question if you guys don't unmute your mic. I see him. He's like.
I just said, when is the coaching class coming out?
No way. No coaching classes for me. I would say this: there's a lot that you can do without a coach. Until you exhaust all of the free resources online, don't hire a coach. And even if you were to call me and say, Austin, I'll pay you to help me, I will not take your money until you exhaust every free resource out there. Don't pay for a coach. Sorry, that's probably not an exciting answer to hear.
I mean, we don't want to spend the money anyways.
Right. Tiffany says, how to empower families that are living in communities that end up gentrified. It seems like what you're doing is... Yeah. Tiffany, is there a market that you're currently investing in or looking at investing in? You can put it in the chat if there's too much noise. I see Don just came off of mute, so he's about to ask the most important question of the night. Go, Don.
No, I wasn't gonna ask a question. I was just listening.
I got it. No worries. Yeah, Tiffany, I think I'll definitely keep you in the loop for future calls like this. But I would say the first thing that anyone can do is what Lucia said, and just explore your city's history, the city that you live in, what kind of programs are out there right now, even if it's not a market that you want to invest in. What I found is the markets, or what I learned in my own city, won't be exactly the same in other markets, but there are principles in what I'm learning that I can apply to other markets. I see you put here St. Louis or Atlanta. I know Atlanta is still appreciating, but it could be a competitive market to get into. St. Louis seems like a really good idea, honestly, because it's not as competitive yet, and the price point is still low. So that might be a good idea. Atlanta's still at that place where you can purchase something reasonably without being outbid by like $50,000 in cash, like every other market. So it is 6:31. It is officially sushi time, guys. I appreciate you guys being on this call, and I just want to encourage you. We can make this happen. We can help families in different communities own homes, become financially literate. It sounds crazy, but we can actually make an impact in the areas that we live. So keep going. Don't give up. Don't slow down. If you have any questions or anything, I am on Facebook as well as Instagram. It is Rentals to Retirement. There you go in the chat. So shoot any questions you have over to me. Would love to help you any way that I can. Otherwise, have a great night, guys. Appreciate you all. Go eat dinner if you haven't already. That baby looks like she's ready to go to sleep too. Oh, and Erwin's cooking. There we go, Erwin. Awesome. Have a good night, guys.